Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen of an angelic field. Today I sit in front of you today on vacation. As always, I like to project my light in a place meant where I'm expected to relax but can't seem to get past these energies that calls me to hop on to the camera essentially to project a message to humanity. I'm sitting in front of this beautiful view. I'm going to show you actually. I tried to get this view in the back end, but the lighting in this room is absolutely horrible. That is the nature reserve here. We're in Singapore actually. I think this hotel is called the Mandai Rainforest Resort. And it's in the middle of an area where there's a lot of stagnation in regards to energetic frequencies. The animals that live here, there's a multiplicity of zoos in this area, and it draws thousands of visitors annually to congregate here onto these lands to come see the beauty of Singapore, come see the beauty of this. This lush greenery, this lush scenery. Within the essence of it all, like just look at that, even just outside my window. Where am I? On the second floor. It's so beautiful. I woke up and I opened up the curtain scape to see the world outside, and I was in awe by just how the perfection of the shapes of the leaves, the trees swaying in the wind gently. I'm sorry that you can't see it right now, but perhaps on another day, another time, another frequency field, you will be drawn into this field to come into Singapore and see for yourself. Had you been a light worker, if you're a light worker, if you've never not been a light worker, you would have been drawn out of your bed, out of your comfort, out of your placement where you sit, out of your placement of seatedness to travel the world. You would have had the opportunity to be granted the funds to linger around a bit more in your field to a point, to a perspective of needing to explore, of being called out onto your journey. And as we near the ascension frequencies that are fast dawning upon an entire civilization in coherence within Gaia's field, light workers will begin to be called to awaken to their destination, to their destiny, to the overarching awakened energy that we hold, that is everlastingly granted to an entire human civilization. And in this moment in time, I'm able to declare to you that it's not over. The awakening process has only just begun. For some light workers, you've had an inkling, you've had an ounce, you've had a doubt, you've had a distortion field dawn upon you in a moment in time where you felt like something is different, something is off, something is wrong, something is incohesive, something is incoherent, something is unbeknownst to you and I in that moment in time, just not right. And as I turn the camera back around, let's speak in the presence of nature. Even though the lighting is so horrible right now, I just want you guys to focus on the beauty of it all. Gaia herself waves forthcomingly to you to welcome your energy fields. And if you're listening to the podcast version, don't worry, as the genetic frequency within this encompassment of this messaging scope will reach you, will reach the person that is intended to hear these messages. And if not, if you're watching this video, listen intently, in congruency with the way that the leaves have decided to move in the background here. And listen to my voice intently, because the messaging that is the activations that will come with this video is in cohesiveness with the activations that this land has been receiving upon the dawning of the civilization as it is strategically linked and strategically placed upon the soul of Gaia's bosom to receive and to give these lingering activations to all that crosses its lands, to all that bears this energetic frequency within the northern scope, of the southern scope, of the eastern scope, of the western scope, of all of the energetic ley lines that interlinks between, to and from the energetic ley lines of Gaia's fruition. Within Gaia's fruition sits a rock, sits a stone, sits a consciousness, sits an overbearing, overarching energy scope that you and I shall not be able to ignore for much longer. And as I set my phone down here, just focus on the way that the leaves are swaying. Not so much on my face because it's very dark in the room, and the reason why I decided to start this video facing the other direction is that I thought I'd be able to get more light on my face, but apparently Source wants me to switch the phone into the other direction so we can focus on nature. Nature herself in all of her glory. Gaia is going through an awakening like any other consciousness within the scope of civilizations past, present, and future. This awakening shall bring forth another encompassment of another leveling within consciousness itself, within consciousness herself, within consciousness himself. And as I sit here and also focus on the beauty of it all, staring out into the abyss, branches hang down from the overgrowth, from the floor above, and beautiful trees, banana-looking trees with leaves hanging down. And had I not known better, I wouldn't have been able to pull up the names of these trees, but names don't really matter in this moment in time, as the beauty of it all lingers in one entirety of a consciousness. All that you see outside this window, all that you feel outside your being, all that you feel within your being, all that encompasses every single branch, every single leaf, every single character within this backdrop that I sit in front of, encompasses an entirety of a consciousness, ladies and gentlemen. Mother Nature herself never not has a consciousness, doesn't not have a consciousness, will never not become an entirety of not one consciousness, ladies and gentlemen. So as you pluck the leaf in your backyard, the consciousness over here can overarchingly reach into the pain felt and within the distortional field of that leaf that you've plucked in your backyard. And as the atomic bomb set off in the multiplicities of wars that we've had over the generations, of bombing, of testing, of weaponry, of pollution, of the congregation within civilizations, within generations of civilizations, within all of the scopes that you could ever imagine to be true and envision to never not be true. Within this congregation that I speak of comes an ailment that has gone far out of alignment, projecting into the Singaporean lands here as all of the energetic frequencies that travels to and from these lineages and ley lines that interconnects this one entirety of a consciousness congregates somewhere, congregates elsewhere, congregates inwhere, congregates outwhere, congregates in a multitude of multiplicities of directional frequencies that have skewed itself into misalignment, into disalignment, into disaligning with it being so true to itself, and as it wanted to sway left and forthrightingly swaying into the darkness of what is, and backrightingly swaying into the brightness of what is, and lovingly swaying into the projected field of Gaia's field, within her consciousness, within epic distortional field of the encompassment of where we live, of where we breathe, of where we coincide with, of what we see in the middle of the days as we project onto our path, of how we smell in the middle of the nights as we project into our dreamscape, of how an entire civilization could reach this point beyond belief, beyond imagination, beyond coherence itself, beyond what I could ever describe as God's forthcoming will, God's forthcoming grace, Yeshua's forthcoming energy field, Yeshua's forthcoming bodily fluids, Yeshua's forthcomingly step above step between steps of all of the steps that can ever congregate upon the surface of Gaia's field. Within Gaia's field, what you see outside my window is a representation within the all, down to the way that the leaves are swaying, down to the ways that the water is grooving, down to the ways that that branch will never ever stop moving as long as the wind breathes upon its being a breath, an everlastingly distortional breath, an everlastingly deep breath, an everlastingly tranquilized breath within the brightness sitting in the darkness of what is. And as we approach 2027 in fruition, ladies and gentlemen, as we wrap up 2026, and I know we're only sitting near the end of March, almost beginning of April, and so much has transpired since the beginning of this year, that forthcomingly, righteously, humanity in its entirety has begun to awaken to. In regards to past conglomeracies within dictatorial systems of how and what we got here to become, of where and when we got here to beneath it all. To beneath it all is an epic distortional field of where we've crawled ourselves out of in a moment in time of a control mechanism that triggered us into an awakening, so steeped in distortional fields. And within the baby stages of this awakening, I sit here in Mandai Resort Rainforest recording this video on March 26th. On March 27th, actually, Singaporean time, I sit to record this video. I sit as a birthday gift within Gaia's fields, as creation itself never ever not created her to be birthed into the scape, just as it had created you to be birthed into your bodily fluids, just as it had created itself to be birthed into this cradle of humanity within humanity itself. And as we sit here only in representation of a fractal of the story that I tell, of the fractal of the story that is the entirety within it all, I'd like to congratulate each and every single fractal within the storyscape, within the story scope of how far we've made it. As I sit in this tranquility, within these overarching depths of despair that Gaia is beginning to feel, that an entire humanity will begin to shed off of this blindfold that's been blinding them from the coalition within the comfort that they sit, within the normalcy that they feel is seemingly so normal, which it is not. I congratulate each and every fractal of the system, each and every storyline within the encompassment of who and where we represent, of what and how we represent, of a clear distinction field between the darkness of what is within the congruencies of how it travels forthrightingly within these energetic lineages and energetic blueprints and energetic frequencies to deliver into its ultimate destination within Gaia's alignment field, within her heart chakra, within her brain chakra, within her third eye chakra. And I'm well aware that a brain chakra had never been described as so, that the crown chakra had always been none other than the God's chakra, the source chakra. And yet, as I touch base on this brain chakra, I touch base on this whole entire humanity of being trapped in our minds, of being trapped in the distortional field of a placement where there is no chakra, of being trapped and looking in the oppositional frequency within the directional scope of where we're never ever supposed to linger around for too long. And as we've lingered around within our brains for entire eons of civilizations within these reincarnation cycles that seemingly never ever ends, it's time now to project ourselves back into the third eye chakra. And as your pineal glands begins to open up, as your third eye frequency begins to open up into a coalition of brightness that will intermingle within the darkness that you sit within and without this frequency to become, to encompass. Just know that it has never been an accident. It was never been accidental that we're here, that we're sitting here, that Gaia is sitting here, that she screamed for help, that she screeched for the neediness within humanity to need to awaken, to want to awaken, to need to subconsciously grasp onto the meaning of it all, the invisibility within the meaning of it all, within this distortional field is all that we've been stopped from doing by the elites of today, is all that we've been petrified to project into a reality field of our forthcoming righteousness within our consciousness by the elites of today, who have done everything in their power within their grasp to stop this awakening in different projected trajectories of a place with no bordering system, in different projected trajectories of a place without a bordering system. And even as you sit in congregation within your separate selves, within the wholeness of the groups that you belong to, and even as you sit in congregation without your separate selves, without the wholeness of these groups that you belong to a system, ladies and gentlemen, one that cannot cohere into the wholeness of what is, as long as these bordering systems are subconsciously dividing humanity from that of the fruition of other parts within the self, from that of the fruition of other parts within humanity. Within your left foot sits a left toe. Within your right hand sits a right pinky finger. Within the top of your scalp sits your hair that grows, never endingly grows, never knows how to stop growing unless it falls, until it falls. And ladies and gentlemen, as that very center point perspective, coming from this very center point ailment of what shall we do when the left toe perspective, the right pinky perspective, the top hairline perspective sits behind a consciousness within subconscious of a separation so steeped in distortional fields that it feels like it's got no lineage, it's got no connection to each other whatsoever. What shall we do when the left hand perspective clashes with the right hand perspective to a point where we're fighting within the self, to a point where we can never reach a tendency to agree within the self of this equilibrium that was ingrained, that had been built in to equilibrize us into a fruition of wholeness, into balance itself. If equilibrize is even a word, ladies and gentlemen, the perspective of it all, the ridiculous of it all, and even having to come up with the words to feel balance within the human body of the entirety of the encompassment of it all is something that Gaia had been struggling with in her subconscious for all of this time, even prior to her wanting to stop descending into the darkness of what is, the wholeness of what is that separates her in these schemes as she feels into the northern hemisphere, the southern hemisphere, the western hemisphere, the eastern hemisphere, feeling into the different frequencies within the darkness, the different distortional fields that humanity itself had decided to steep into within this brightness of what is the differentiation of the differential races, the language schemes, the educational systems, the inequality and the balance within the fruition of the economic distortional field that sits upon her surface and runs to and fro from these energetic ley lines to balance themselves out. within the entirety of the whole entire story that can never be told in one breath, that can never be told in one storyline, that can never be told in one lifetime, that can never be felt into by you and I in this moment in time as we sit in this distortional field that anchors us down in such a depth, to such a fruition of such a depth that had dragged the whole entire humanity down, down, down into a non-encompassment of within the meaning of humanity itself, within the being and the breathing of humanity, within the conglomeration of all of these different parts that belong to the self that have never ever fallen away from the self. Yet, as I sit in my distortional field, I feel as if I'm separated from where you are. Not in wholeness, not in fruition, not in a reality field in any sense of the form of the projection field of where you sit as you leverage yourself in the separation frequency within the perception field where you shall never ever not end up as long as you've anchored yourself into the left toe, into the right pinky toe, into the left pinky finger, into the top hairline hair perspective of where you've been projecting your energy field for all of this time. And yesterday, as we sat in the Grab as a family traveling to and fro in the downtown core of Singapore, we had an interesting conversation with the Grab driver who began to prod into my husband's reality field in regards to where he feels the distortional field within this war, within these issues, within the problems on this globe stems from. And if, when, where, or not Trump has had anything to do with it. Donald Trump is an interesting character in human biology, in human history, in human anatology, in human congruencies within all of the congruencies that you can ever fathom to be true and envision not to be true. And I say anatology due to the perspective and the pain point of anybody, regardless of who you are, regardless of what cultural scope you come from, regardless of what consciousness you behold or hold, regardless of what geographical placement you've been able to sit on within these bordering scopes of the left pinky toe, of the right earlobe, of the left eyeball gland, wherever you are, wherever you sit, wherever you've landed. And as I sit in the midpoint perspective of where the heart chakra grows and fuels from, I can tell you that anatology could not be a more ridiculous word to describe the way that we perceive this evilness to be projected onto our fields from the body within one person's field, onto the whole entire globe, onto the whole entire Gaia. So let's choose to shift our focus to Donald Trump. Let's choose to shift our focus to Donald A. Trump. Let's choose to shift our focus to Donald asshole Trump, okay? Let's choose to shift our focus into the field of one specific singularity of a field of a person to point this barrel onto his forehead, so to say, because of him and due to his actions and due to his illegitimacy of a reason why he had to become president. He had to win this presidential election. He had to scheme his way to the top. He had to rape his way to fruition. He had to step his way onto other people's toes, onto other people's beings, onto other people's ailments, onto other people's disbeliefs, over other people's presidency, over other people's freedom, over other people's rejection field, over other people's, unbeknownst to them, frequency field of what he needed to do to overcome all of the ailments upon Gaia's surface to make it to a placement of total combustion within the entirety of the whole. Ladies and gentlemen, had you wanted to point that barrel towards Donald asshole Trump, in any moment in time, you're pointing the barrel in the wrong direction, within the wrong frequency, within where they want you to sit, like sitting ducks in a row, within where the darkness, within fruition, could ever want or need you to land, like sitting ducks in a row. And as you point that barrel within this barreling system that barrels down into fruition, out of the heart chakra, into your root chakra, into your fears, into your mind chakra, to anchor down so deeply onto your mind chakra that doesn't even exist to begin with, ladies and gentlemen. And as you're trapped there, trying to make a way, trying to make a feeling, trying to make an escape, trying to make a sense of where all of this is leading, and as you're looking in the wrong direction this whole entire time, I invite you to come back to center. I invite you to come into neutrality. I invite you into a whole new perspective within the viewpoint system that can never lead you astray into God's consciousness, into Source's well-being, into your sky chakra, out of your root chakra, out of the brain encompassment of who did this, what caused this, where is where, when is when, how is what. Did Donald A. Trump alleviate everyone from becoming awakened by making the mistakes in the directional frequency that only Source itself could have lent a hand into projecting its consciousness into fruition, into creating and crafting this reality scape in a way that would lend a hand into the awakening frequency of humanity, period, of humanity in general, period. So no matter where you sit in your perspective field, ladies and gentlemen, and if you've made it even this far down into my projection field of why Donald A. Trump is not a Donald asshole Trump, why Donald A. Trump is not a Donald Savior Trump, why Donald A. Trump is not a Donald Trump, why Donald A. Trump is not an asholic frequency within this frequency of all frequencies, and why the barrel had been pointed in the wrong direction, wrong directional scope this whole entirety of a time. Think about it. This energetic frequency that lingers behind the lineage of all of this that you see behind me, think about it. How can one person bring this down? How can one person rip this forward, rip this backwards, rip this into fruition of a tranquility within a distortional field, without this tranquility within a distortional field that had been here for millennia prior to the fractaling out of this one person, who only took hold of the frequency field upon a specific hold within its field for a specific lineage of a specific amount of time within and without this field. Yet within the little time that he's had so far on that stage, in center stage perspective, perhaps you could argue, of utilizing this power to trigger in the greatest and grandest awakening that you could ever perceive to be true and you could ever deny to have never not existed. And yet as I sit here, I don't praise Donald A. Trump. I don't praise Donald lineage Trump. I don't praise Donald awakening Trump. I don't praise Donald whatever forthcoming word you want to put in between the Donald and the Trump. I don't praise him, as he is a part of humanity. He is a part of you. He is a part of I. He was never not that tooth that ached in the middle of the night, in the entire body of the all that needed to be projected in such a way that the remaining aspects of the healthy portions of the body could alleviate their consciousness into noticing that there's a cavity inside that tooth, that there's a cavity inside that body, that there's a cavity inside consciousness in itself. And as we all glare so forthcomingly and rightfully so and righteously so towards this cavity that's been projecting into our consciousness to alleviate us into the normalcy of what it would be like to sit as the left pinky toe within the entirety of the hole and not notice the tooth decay that's decaying of this virus that could possibly spread down, down, down into the body, into the brain, into the mind, into the soul, into the heart chakra, into the sky chakra, into the root chakra, and take a hold of your pinky toe. In a moment in time when you've been left defenseless due to the projection field that you've chosen to sit in, to not recognize this cavity at its root cause, in a distortional field of what and who and where and why we landed here, I'm here to tell you that this cavity was never not Donald A. Trump, Donald K. Trump, Donald ABC Trump. And yet, this cavity had always and never not been a part of existence in itself. And as we look in the wrong direction, directional scope, let's try to reel ourselves back as to the reasoning why this cavity began to decay our tooth. Within the coalition, within the energy body that sits the person that I speak of, he who projects pain, he who feels pain, he who projected pain in such a scope that alleviated the remaining and rest of the body from this virus to have wanted to and needed to be spread across the globe, across into other portions and aspects on the other side of the distortional fields within the reality field that we've crafted to be, to sit in, to never need to look into the other contingency field to feel the depth of despair in another portion within consciousness is all that the elites have wanted for us to separate into, to alleviate us from the pain of needing to never stop dropping down into a fifth dimensional frequency of fruition, of needing to never stop alleviating ourselves into the awakening of our root chakra in a way that will drag out the alleviating within our consciousness to never not want to encompass the brightness of what is sitting smack middle in the darkness of what is. And I know these words can cause some confusion systems to stir up, but the activation within the message itself, within fruitfulness, within fruitlessness, within all of the tranquility that you can fathom to come up with in this moment in time, just know that there's no possible way in fruition itself, in any reality itself, within any congruency of any story that I tell that anybody else could ever make up, that center point perspectives itself back into the one, within a one person scope of what had caused this trigger point to collapse within humanity. That the all had never always not been the one, that the all has never not been the one in Donald Trump's fruition, that he is you and you are me, that I am you and you are Yeshua in our entirety of the all, that we are all in the oneness of the all, that we can ever project to be it, to be I, to be we, to be I am. And in the forthcoming months and years in fruition, that will bring about the greatest and grandest realization within the self, that you had never been separated from me, that we had never been separated from each other, that Donald Trump had always been a way of us within the implantation of this cavity to decavitize it, to allow other parts and pieces and portions of this entirety of the whole to consciously look upon the deception fields of where this cavity grows, of how it had never not been implanted, of how it had never not been in existence, even prior to the existence of this lineage within this body of this one person that we've decided to point the barrel towards. And as you come into the realization later on in fruition, you may not believe me, you may not coincide with my tranquility in this moment in time. As you come into the realization that all can never not be one and one can never not be all, you will find forgiveness in your soul. As this forgiveness energy had never not been ingrained into the all in a way that can never surpass the darkness that we've belonged to for eons and eons of generational fields, and yet sits in an underlying congruency of where we come from, of our lineage, so steeped within these distortional fields that will begin to tranquilize us in the middle of the nights as we awaken into the awakening of our third eye chakra, ladies and gentlemen, out of the existence of our brain chakra that never really did exist, did it, ladies and gentlemen? And as we come out of the congruency of how we've been trained to encompass this energetic frequency within the all that has been outside my window this entire time. And if you're watching the visualization of this video on your TV screen, on your phone, just know, on your computer system, just know that that is us. That has never not been us, swaying in the wind, trying to find a placement in congruency, feeling lonely as a singularity of a branch, not knowing that we are a part of that entire picture, feeling lonely as the congruency of this branch as it sets ablaze, not knowing that this blaze would trigger the greatest awakening in the whole entire forest. And unbeknownst to the forest, in any moment in time, that unbeknownst to the branch in any moment in time, that unbeknownst to the watering system that sits behind and fuels this entire ecosystem in any moment in time, the knowingness within it all will stir back into the heart chakra within Gaia as she pulls us into fruition of the energetic frequency that we will need to begin to encompass as we set forth into the greatest and grandest retraction process that humanity can ever fathom to be a part of within any moment in time. And as I wrap up on this video, I've got perhaps 12 minutes left. I'm going to say to you once more that Donald A. Trump could not be further from the truth that you are seeking, could not be further from the reality that you are living, could not be further from the separation that has distorted us into the lineage of needing to even point our finger at something of a one thing outside of ourselves to ease us out of this pain and despair by forthcomingly alleviating ourselves into the need to cause more separation, into the need to take a stand for the rights of a specific population. But on what coherence, ladies and gentlemen? On what stand? On what coherency? On what energetic pocket within frequency can you rightfully project this righteousness onto? You are rightful in the dependency within your coherency within the geographical location of where you sit within the way that you've been brainwashed to take a stand. You rightfully sit where you belong, and yet so do they. The opposition of self, the oppositional force that holds an alleviating factor within humanity itself, that sits within their stand as an enemy force to be reckoned with, sits rightfully so in their distortional field to point that barrel back at you. So at the end of the day, at the end of a forthcoming long escape that our pinkies made away from our pinky toes, away from our pinky fingers, away from our toenails, so to say, it's time to rejoice and rejoin in this rightfulness back into the entirety of the whole. It's time to drop all of these bordering systems, all these blame games, all these blamescapes, all of this tranquility lost within the story of us. And yet, as a whole entirety, as you sit in separation frequency, you may say to me, well, Genesis, what am I to do as one person? Even as a light worker, what am I to do? And I'm here to forthcomingly say to you that you were never not alone in the way that you've projected your consciousness into this perception field to relive, to believe, to feel into, to be into, to perceive into. And yet, the reality of that could not be further from the truth that you've sat into, that you've perceived into in this moment in time and within any moment in time in fruition. As all is one and one is all, and God is forthcomingly great and God is forthcomingly wild in any distortional field, in any powerful power that you could ever perceive to be above and beyond Donald asshole Trump or Donald ABC Trump or Donald Savior Trump. That God drives all into fruition. And as God had driven us into the fruition of this war, into the allowance of this cavity to hurt so much at a core level that all different perspectives will begin to shift itself onto the negative perspective of what is to look, to suspect, to glare, to congregate with Uber drivers and Grab drivers and have these discussions within different perspectives. That is all, ladies and gentlemen, that this cavity was meaning had been implanted into our reality field to achieve. That is all. And as we direct our frequency into this cavity that may or may not be projected within the lineage of Donald Trump's lineage, that may or not have been in existence prior to his descent into our frequency, that may or may not have been in existence for the entirety of our existence, that may or may not have been in existence at all in any field, in any fruition of a field. Just know that whatever is happening in your field had never not been a means to an end within this distortional field of collapse. Has never not been a means to an end within this distortional field of the greatest and grandest retraction back to self within the unity consciousness that we feel we cannot seep into as we've not yet ascended and anchored down a 5-dimensional frequency onto Gaia's field. And as we look around in oppositionary directions, do not forget to look up and look down and look side to side at your neighboring forces within this light working field to rejoin your energy bodies back into Gaia's energy body, as she is the star of the show and she undoubtedly has strength inside her granted by a source consciousness within the all to become the all, to never ever have left the all to begin with, to be able to retract her consciousness into a fruition that will pull the entirety of the all back into the all at the end of a long, arduous journey within our quantum verse, within all of creation. Gaia had never not been the star. And as we look to Gaia, as we look to Donald A. Trump, Donald whoever Trump, just know that the encompassment within the all will always never not be in the all, that the person, the thing, the energy, the group that you're looking at had always been a mirror reflection of that in which needed to be reflected back onto the all, to see more widely, to see more greatly, to feel more deeply, to feel more tranquilized within this distortional field prior to this collapse within this distortional field that will reel us back to the truth of the overarching truth that you and I can never envision to be true or imagine to never not be true. And yet, God is great, God is powerful. All hail this greatness that coincides and proceeds through the middle of the nights to become the all, to have never not been the all, and to segregate and sever our limbs into different coherency fields within these perspective fields has been a beauty within it all. And as I shift into neutrality and focus on how beautiful the entirety of what is can never not be, just know that as you drop down into these distortional fields within the darkness, you will soon come upon this reality within neutrality, as Gaia has decided to shift herself back into the all, whereby pulling each and every one of us lightworkers back into fruition to become activated, to then activate an entire humanity back into fruition of the realization that the all had always been them, that the all had never not been them, that Donald A. Trump has never not been them. And just another perspective within the same body scope that they belong in. And this cavity is not a forever arching cavity. This cavity serves a purpose, as true cavities always serve a purpose. Nothing ever happens without a purpose within our bodyscape, within our body scope, as within, so without, ladies and gentlemen. And as I wrap up on this video, I hope you all can reflect a little bit deeper, a little bit longer, a little bit less distortionally on who you point that barrel towards, and look into yourself to find that neutrality point that brings about so much peace when you're not fighting to seek for an enemy, where you're not overthinking to look for a cause within this distortional field that will collapse you back into neutrality no matter what. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you're having a wonderful day, wonderful evening, wonderful morning, no matter where you are. Love always, Genesis ordained, and I will be back for another encompassment within the all.